What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with the 5 best and 5 worst things about the Samsung Galaxy A03s. So let's get started. Now, the first thing that I do want to mention, though, is that this phone is a very low-end budget offering from Samsung. So we certainly should not expect this device to give us all the latest and greatest features and highest-end specifications, because, of course, if you want to spend $1,000 on a smartphone, then you can get that. But if you don't want to spend too much, then obviously there are some things that you will not be getting. And in general, I do think this phone is a really good value. But I'm going to start by going over the top 5 best things, and then the top 5 worst things are more nitpicking, but they are things that you will want to keep in mind if you happen to get this phone. But starting off with my top 5 favorite things about the Samsung Galaxy A03s, coming in at number 1 is that we do have a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now, starting with the iPhone 7, that was pretty much the first smartphone to get rid of the headphone jack. And since then, that trend has really been catching on. Pretty much all of the higher-end Android phones no longer offer headphone jacks, and we're even seeing more mid-range and lower-level phones also not giving us that feature. So I'm glad, though, that we at least do have it here with the A03s. Now, I do realize that Bluetooth headphones are becoming more and more popular, and that's great. This phone does have Bluetooth, of course, so you can always connect those to it. But I also know that a lot of people still have traditional wired headphones, and this phone does still accommodate those. So I think that's definitely a good thing. Now, my second favorite thing about the A03s is that we have a fingerprint sensor on the power button. So the predecessor phone to this device, the A02s, actually did not have a fingerprint sensor at all. So I'm glad to see that from that generation to this generation, we now do have a fingerprint sensor. And it's also very fast and responsive, which is another great thing about it. So I'm really glad it's here. And in addition to that, this phone also supports face unlock, so it's really cool that there are multiple methods for getting into it. Now, my third favorite thing about the A03s is that the performance is actually pretty decent. Now, don't get me wrong, it's certainly not the world's fastest phone by any means. And in fact, it's relatively slow if you compare it to most of the other phones out there. But for a very low-level, low-end device like this one, I'm pretty happy with the performance. It does have the MediaTek Helio P35 processor with 3GB of RAM, and it at least runs fast enough that you can use this phone for most of the basic tasks that you'd want to use a smartphone for. So for text messaging, phone calls, web browsing, and light social media, this phone is plenty powerful enough for that. But I remember not too long ago that most of the very low-level phones from various companies tended to be so bad that you literally couldn't use them with anything. So I'm just glad that with the A03s, it's fast enough that you can actually use this as your phone. Now, for most people out there, it probably will end up being a bit too slow, but if you are someone who wants a smartphone for just the core fundamentals of what you'd use a smartphone for, then it will get the job done. Another thing too is that I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test here with the phone, and I got a single core score of 174 and a multi-core score of 888. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then compare your scores to these scores to get a better idea if the A03s is actually going to be a performance upgrade for you. Now, moving on to my fourth favorite thing about this device, and that is the material on the back. Now, this phone is offered in a variety of different colors, and at certain carriers, you might not have too many options, but regardless, the phone has this very nice matte finish, and it has kind of a wavy look to it. So I feel like Samsung really did make a great decision when going with this material for multiple reasons. The first reason is it visually looks good. The second reason is it doesn't pick up fingerprints, which I guess technically would fall under that it visibly looks good, but it doesn't pick up fingerprints. It has kind of a cool look to it, and it doesn't feel cheap either. So I think in general, Samsung made a good call putting this material on the back of the phone versus maybe something a bit cheaper or a material that can pick up more fingerprints, like a glossy back, for example. I'm just glad that they went this route. And then my fifth favorite thing about the phone, and there are many more, but these are my top 5, is that the phone has a very large battery. Now, the battery here has a capacity of 5,000 milliamp hours. And it can recharge at up to 15 watts. So I'm really glad that we have a big battery. One, of course, because you're going to be getting very good battery life from the phone, easily a day, if not 2 days. But another good thing too is that as the battery degrades over time, which happens to every smartphone, that's just the way it is, it's not going to be quite as noticeable here with the phone because it already has a very large battery to begin with. So if you're starting off with probably a bigger battery than you need, then as it degrades over time, it's not going to be nearly as noticeable versus a phone that already has a small battery that then degrades. So all in all, I think Samsung made a great choice giving this phone a very large battery. But now that I've gone over my top 5 best things about the Samsung Galaxy A03s, let's now go over my top 5 worst things about the phone. And again, these various things are not really deal breakers necessarily, because this is a low-end device, so it is to be expected that you're not getting everything. But these are things that you will want to know about prior to getting the phone, and I definitely want you to know as much info about it so that you don't potentially regret your purchase. Now, the first shortcoming of the Galaxy A03s is that there is no ultra-wide-angle camera. Now, we do have a triple camera setup on the back of the phone, but we're getting a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. Now, all in all, the cameras on this device are not bad by any means, but it would have been nice to have an ultra-wide angle camera with the device because it gives us yet another way to take more interesting photos. There are certain situations where it definitely makes more sense to use the ultra-wide camera, like if you're on vacation, for example, or maybe you're out hiking and there's a big tree you want to take a picture of. I don't know, there's a lot of situations where there are times that you would want a wider field of view with your camera. So it is a little bit limiting that we don't have an ultra-wide camera with the A03s, but maybe that's something that Samsung might add with the successor to this phone, or at least I certainly hope so. The second thing about the A03s that I'm not a huge fan of is that the display is only 720p. Now, in general, the display does not look bad. However, at this point in 2022, I really wish that there were no smartphones that had 720p displays. So it certainly would have been nice if it was 1080p. It certainly would have made this phone even better. Now, the third worst thing about the phone is the large bezels. We have a pretty large bottom bezel here, and then we do also have a water drop notch up top. Now, all in all, again, this is not a deal breaker, but we've had pretty much this same design, well, definitely with the A02s from last year, but we've seen this same design with a thicker bottom bezel and a water drop notch on tons of different devices from a variety of different companies. So while this form factor does get the job done, it's really nothing too innovative or interesting. So I do wish that Samsung would kind of change it up with some of these lower end phones. Coming in at number 4 is the storage. So with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we only have 32 gigabytes of internal storage, which honestly, maybe for a lower end phone like this, it can get away with it, but that's barely enough. Apps continue to get bigger and bigger in file size as time goes on, which means that you can kind of do less and less with your phone. Now, the phone does at least have microSD card expansion, but nothing really beats having a lot of internal storage. So I wish they would have given this phone 64 gigs instead of 32. You can see that I've already used up 56% of the internal storage, and of that, around 10 gigabytes is just the system software. So the system software already takes up nearly a third of the storage here on the phone. So again, if they would have given us more, that would have been awesome, because as of now, I don't have a ton of internal storage left, so I could easily see this filling up completely after maybe 6 months or even a year. And then my fifth least favorite thing about the Samsung Galaxy A03s is that the phone does not have NFC. Now I know that NFC is not very common with lower end budget smartphones, but I really wish it was, especially because it doesn't really cost a lot to implement, and NFC is becoming more and more popular and more useful. NFC is the main technology used to make mobile contactless payments, for example. So if you like to use Apple Pay on an iPhone, or even Samsung Pay on some of the higher end Samsung phones, then just know that you won't be able to do that here with the A03s. So I really wish this phone did have NFC, because that would be yet another added value proposition to it. But this concludes my video on the top 5 best and worst things about the Samsung Galaxy A03s. I hope you enjoyed this video, seeing these various pros and cons, and hopefully they gave you a better idea of what this phone is all about. And again, the worst things about the phone are really not that bad necessarily, especially considering that this is a low-end Android phone. Those things might be things important to you, so that's why I wanted to make this video. But definitely give the video a thumbs up, sub to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and have a great rest of your day.